My name is Charlotte, and I am 36 years old. For the last 10 years, I've been more of a parent to my younger sister Maya than our own mother ever was. When our mother passed away from cancer 2 years ago, I thought my caregiving duties were finally over. But then, at our annual family reunion, my father, Edward, made a shocking announcement. He was selling our childhood home, the sprawling farmhouse that had been in our family for 5 generations. And he was giving the entire profit, nearly $2 million, to Maya. Her reason? She was young and needed a fresh start after a series of bad life choices. My 10 years of sacrifice were dismissed in a single sentence. What my father didn't know was that our mother had left me one final secret gift: a key. A key to a dusty old box in the attic that held a truth about our family's perfect past and about him that would change the definition of deserving forever. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the secret that unraveled a lifetime of lies, hit like and subscribe to hear more true stories about family dynamics and explosive revelations. My life, before it was defined by my sister's needs, was a life of quiet ambition. I had a degree in botany and a dream job working at a national park restoring native plant populations. I lived in a small cabin on the park's edge, woke up to the sound of birds, and spent my days with my hands in the soil. It was a life of purpose, a life I had chosen and loved. Then, when I was 26, my mother got her first cancer diagnosis. It was treatable, but the chemotherapy was brutal. At the same time, my sister Maya, then just 21, was hitting a self-destructive spiral. She had dropped out of college, was dating a man who was clearly bad news, and was racking up credit card debt at an alarming rate. Our father, Edward, a stoic and respected history professor, was completely overwhelmed, both by his wife's illness and his youngest daughter's rebellion. I was the one who stepped in. I took a leave of absence from my job, gave up my cabin, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. I told myself it was temporary. I became my mother's primary caregiver, driving her to appointments, managing her medications, and holding her through the long, painful nights. I also became Maya's de facto parent, cleaning up her messes, paying off her debts with my own savings, and trying to steer her towards a more stable path. My mother went into remission, and I tried to reclaim my life. I went back to my job, but the dynamic had been set. Every time Maya got into trouble, a DUI, an eviction, another maxed out credit card, the family looked to me to fix it. My father would call, not with anger at Maya, but with a tone of weary disappointment, asking what we should do, when he really meant what I should do. Maya, for her part, accepted my help as her due, a permanent feature of our sisterly relationship. Then, 5 years later, the cancer came back, and this time it was terminal. I moved back home for good, sacrificing the last remnants of my career to be with my mother in her final years. The day before she passed, she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "There's a key in my jewelry box, the little silver one," I said. "It's for the old trunk in the attic. It's yours now. Don't let your father bully you, Charlotte. You deserve more than you think." I had assumed she was talking about a few sentimental heirlooms. I had no idea she was giving me a weapon. After her death, the family imbalance became even more pronounced. My father retreated into his work, leaving me to manage the house and a still floundering Maya. Now 31, Maya's life hadn't improved. She worked sporadic bartending jobs, had a string of failed relationships, and still seemed to believe that her big break was just around the corner, one that would require no actual effort on her part. I stayed in the family home, paying the bills with the small inheritance my mother had left me, acting as a buffer between my grieving father and my chaotic sister. I was stuck, my own dreams gathering dust like the old furniture in the attic.
The family reunion was my father's idea. He declared it was time to move forward and celebrate our family's resilience. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years, gathered in the sprawling backyard of the farmhouse. The air was thick with the smell of barbecue and the sound of polite, surface-level conversation. Maya was in her element, flitting between groups, charming everyone with stories of her adventures, conveniently leaving out the parts where I had to bail her out of jail or pay her overdue rent. My father gathered everyone on the back porch for his announcement. He stood there, looking patriarchal and solemn, a glass of iced tea in his hand. As you all know, this house has been the heart of our family for over a century, he said. It holds so many memories, but it's too much for me to manage alone now, so I've made the difficult decision to sell it. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This house was our history, our legacy. Selling it was unthinkable. But my father wasn't finished. The market is excellent right now. I expect the sale to net close to $2 million. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Maya. I've decided that the entire proceeds of the sale will go to Maya. This time, the gasp was one of pure shock. I felt the air leave my lungs. Every head in the yard turned first to a beaming Maya, then to me. I could feel their pity, their morbid curiosity. Maya has had a difficult start in life, my father continued, his voice resonating with paternalistic wisdom. She needs a chance to build a secure future, to have a fresh start without financial burdens. Charlotte, he said, finally addressing me, has always been the responsible one. She's self-sufficient and has her mother's inheritance to fall back on. I know she understands that this is what's best for the family. He smiled at me, a confident, dismissive smile that expected my silent compliance. He had just erased 10 years of my life, 10 years of sacrifice, and reframed it as simple self-sufficiency. He had mistaken my strength for a lack of need. Maya rushed to him, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Oh, Daddy, thank you! This will change everything!" she cried. I stood there, frozen. My aunts and uncles were avoiding my gaze. My cousins were whispering amongst themselves. I felt utterly and completely alone, a ghost at my own family celebration. That night, after everyone had left, and Maya had gone out to celebrate her newfound fortune with friends, I went up to the attic. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten memories. In the corner, under a dusty sheet, was the old sea trunk. I pulled the small silver key from my pocket, the one my mother had given me. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I lifted the heavy lid, not knowing what to expect. Inside, nestled among my mother's wedding dress and old photo albums, was a small, locked metal box. Taped to the lid was an envelope with my name on it, written in my mother's familiar hand. I opened it. "My dearest Charlotte," the note began. "I know this will be hard to read. Your father is a good man in many ways, but he is a man who believes in the stories he tells himself, not the truths that are right in front of him. He has always seen your grandfather as a hero and has tried to live up to that impossible ideal. The truth is much more complicated. The combination to this box is your grandfather's birthday. I am so sorry for the burden I am leaving you with, but you are the only one strong enough to carry it. Use this to protect yourself. You deserve a life of your own. My grandfather's birthday, 081545. I dialed the numbers into the small combination lock on the box. It clicked open. Inside, there was no jewelry, no hidden cash. There were just letters, bundled together with faded ribbon, and a single, official-looking document. It was a birth certificate. The name on it was Edward Hayes, my father, but the name listed under father was not my great-grandfather's. It was a name I had never seen before. Thomas Bellwether.
I picked up the first letter, dated 1946. It was a love letter written by my grandmother to this unknown man, a man who was, according to this document, my father's biological father. I sat on the dusty attic floor for hours, piecing together a family history I never knew existed. The letters told a story of a forbidden romance. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been in love with Thomas Bellwether, a hired hand who worked on their family farm. Her father, my great-grandfather, a proud and controlling man, had forbidden the relationship, considering Thomas beneath their family station. But they had continued to see each other in secret. Then, my grandmother discovered she was pregnant. Her father was furious. He sent Thomas away, threatening him with violence if he ever returned or tried to contact Eleanor again. To avoid a public scandal, he arranged a quick marriage between my grandmother and William Hayes, a respectable young man from a neighboring town who needed a wife and was willing to accept a damaged bride in exchange for financial security. That man was the man I had known as my grandfather, the man my father idolized. My grandfather, William, had agreed to raise my father, Edward, as his own son, but on one condition: the secret of his true parentage would be buried forever. My father would never be told. The letters were filled with my grandmother's heartbreak. She wrote of her love for Thomas, her fear of her father, and her reluctant acceptance of a life with a man she respected but did not love. She had kept her promise, raising my father to believe William Hayes was his biological father. She had played the part of the dutiful wife, and William had been a kind, if distant, stepfather. But the lie had shaped their entire family. My father's lifelong hero worship of William, the man he thought was his father, suddenly made a painful kind of sense. He had spent his life trying to live up to the legacy of a man who wasn't his blood relative. And this house, this farm, it was Hayes family land. It had been passed down through William's family. My father had no biological claim to it. He was the son of a hired hand, a secret my grandmother carried to her grave. This explained my mother's final words to me. You deserve more than you think. She wasn't just talking about my sacrifice, she was talking about my bloodline. I was a true Hayes. My father, and by extension, my sister Maya, were not. The irony was staggering. My father was about to sell a legacy he had no biological right to and give it to his daughter, who also had no biological right to it, all while disinheriting the one person who did. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this happen. This wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. It was about honoring the silent sacrifice of my grandmother and the secret pain she had carried her entire life. I went downstairs and called my father. We need to have another family meeting, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Tomorrow morning at the house. Just you, me, and Maya. There's something you need to see. Charlotte, the decision is final, he said, his tone firm. I'm not here to debate it. There will be no more discussion. Oh, I think there will be, I replied, my voice now steady. I think you'll find this very, very discussion-worthy. Be here at 10. I hung up before he could argue. The next morning, they arrived, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and impatience. Maya looked hungover. My father looked like a man who was ready to put his difficult daughter in her place once and for all. All right, Charlotte, let's get this over with, my father said, crossing his arms. What is so important that it couldn't wait? I didn't say a word. I simply walked over to the heavy oak dining table and laid out the contents of the metal box, the birth certificate, and the bundled letters. "What is all this?" Maya asked, picking up the birth certificate with a bored expression. Her eyes scanned a page and then widened in confusion. "Dad, why does this say your father's name is Thomas Bellwether?" My father snatched the document from her hand. He stared at it, his face slowly losing all its color. He picked up one of the letters, recognized his mother's handwriting, and began to read. I watched as the story he had built his entire identity on crumbled around him in the space of a few silent minutes. My father sank into a dining room chair as if his legs could no longer support him. He held the letter in his hand, but his gaze was distant, lost in the wreckage of a life he now saw was built on a lie. Maya stood beside him, her face a mask of confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Who is Thomas Bellwether?" "He was your grandfather," I said quietly. "Your real grandfather. William Hayes, the man Dad has revered his entire life, was his stepfather. This house, this land, it's Hayes family property. Our grandmother Eleanor married into it. Dad has no blood claim to it." Maya stared at me, then at our father, the implications of my words slowly dawning on her. The $2 million inheritance she had been celebrating was not rightfully hers. It was a legacy she had no biological connection to. "This can't be true," my father finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My mother, she would have told me." "She couldn't," I said, pushing the pile of letters towards him. "She was sworn to secrecy. She lived her whole life with this secret to protect you, to protect the family's reputation. But she didn't want the lie to continue after she was gone. She left this for me, for us." He spent the next hour reading. He read the letters of love from his mother to a man he'd never known. He read about her fear of her own father and her quiet resignation to a life she hadn't chosen. He read about the quiet dignity of William Hayes, the man who had raised him as his own, knowing he was another man's son. Maya and I sat in silence, watching him. The smugness was gone from her face, replaced with a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Her fresh start was built on the foundation of our grandmother's lifelong sacrifice. When he finished, my father looked up, his eyes filled with profound and shattering grief. It wasn't just grief for his mother, it was grief for the man he thought he was, for the history he had cherished. "All my life," he stammered, "I've tried to be him. I've tried to live up to his name, the Hayes name." "You are still the man he raised," I said gently. "That doesn't change. But the legacy, the inheritance, that's different." He looked at me, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. Not as his responsible, self-sufficient daughter, but as the keeper of his family's truth. "What your mother said in her note," I began carefully, "she said I deserved more. I don't think she just meant financially. I think she meant I deserve a life of my own. For 10 years, I've put this family first. I gave up my career, my home, my future, to care for Mom and to clean up Maya's messes. I did it out of love, but it came at a cost." Maya had the grace to look ashamed. She sank into the chair next to our father, silent. "You were going to sell this house, a place that holds my grandmother's entire painful history, and give everything to the person who has sacrificed the least, while dismissing the person who has sacrificed the most. You weren't doing it to be cruel. You were doing it because you were blind. You saw what you wanted to see. One daughter who needed help, and another who seemed to be fine. You mistook my resilience for a lack of need." He had no response. The truth of my words was undeniable. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, taking control of the conversation. "This house will not be sold. It is the last piece of our grandmother's story, and it needs to be honored. The secret of your parentage stays between the three of us. The world doesn't need to know. It would only cause more pain. But we will live with this truth now." I turned to Maya. "You will get a job, a real, full-time job. You will start paying your own bills. You will go to therapy to figure out why you've spent your 20s in a state of arrested development. Your free ride is over. I will help you find a job. I will help you with a budget, but I will no longer be your safety net." Maya nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. And then I turned to my father. "And you will start seeing me, both of us, as who we are, not who you need us to be. Maya is not a helpless child, and I am not an emotionless caregiver. We are your daughters, and we both need a father." He looked at the birth certificate, then back at me. A lifetime of certainty shattered. "The house," he said. "What happens to the house?" "The house stays in the family," I replied, "and I will be living in it. I earned it, not through a will, but through 10 years of my life. This will be my fresh start." The 6 months that followed were a period of quiet, seismic shifts within our family. The grand, dramatic explosion I had anticipated never came. Instead, the revelation settled into our lives, slowly and fundamentally altering our dynamics. True to my word, I moved permanently into the farmhouse. The first few weeks were strange. I felt like a guest in my own life, sleeping in my parents' old bedroom, cooking in a kitchen filled with the ghosts of my mother's final years. But slowly, I began to make it my own. I cleared out the old, dusty furniture, painted the walls in warm, bright colors, and most importantly, I began to design the garden my grandmother had always dreamed of, but never had the freedom to create. My father moved into a small apartment in town. The process of dismantling the homes he had lived in for 40 years was a painful one for him, a physical manifestation of the dismantling of his own identity. We worked together, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. In the process, we started to talk, really talk, for the first time in my adult life. He told me stories about his mother, not as a caregiver, but as a young woman. He spoke of her quiet intelligence, her hidden strength, and he grieved for the life she might have had. In sharing her story, he began to see his own more clearly. He was not the heir to a grand legacy, but the son of a woman who had loved him enough to build a fortress of secrets around him. Maya, to everyone's surprise, rose to the occasion. The shock of the revelation and the removal of the financial safety net she had always taken for granted seemed to be the catalyst she needed. With my help, she got a job as a receptionist at a local veterinary clinic. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. She started paying her own rent on a small apartment. She enrolled in therapy. The change was not instantaneous. There were still moments of her old, entitled self, but they became less frequent. For the first time, she started asking about my life, my old job, my dreams. A real, fragile sisterhood began to grow in the space where a toxic dependency had once lived. She even started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, finding a sense of purpose in caring for something other than herself. We kept the secret. Our extended family was simply told that after a long discussion, my father had decided not to sell the house after all, and that I would be staying there to look after it. There were whispers and confused questions, but the sheer force of our family's unified front quelled most of the gossip. One evening, about 6 months after the meeting, my father and Maya came over for dinner. I had cooked a simple meal, and we sat around the old oak dining table where so many tense family conversations had taken place. But this time, the atmosphere was different. It was lighter, more honest. My father looked around the room, at the fresh paint, the new art on the walls. "Your grandmother would have loved what you've done with this place," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She never felt like it was truly hers to change. She was just a steward of the Hayes legacy. Now it's our legacy," I said. "All of ours. A new one." Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Charlotte," she said, her eyes sincere, "for not burning it all down. You could have. You had every right to. What would have been the point? I replied. Our family was built on a painful secret. I don't want our future to be built on a painful truth. I'd rather build it on grace. My father raised his glass. To grace, he said, and to fresh starts. We all drank to that. My life is not the one I planned when I was 22. I'm not restoring native plants in a national park. I am restoring my family, cultivating a new kind of landscape built on honesty and forgiveness. The farmhouse is no longer a monument to a false legacy. It is my home, a place of healing. I have started my own landscape design business, taking on small, local clients. My work is rooted here, in the soil my grandmother loved. The journals are safely locked away in the sea trunk. They are a part of our history, but they no longer define our future. My mother was right. I did deserve more. I deserved a life of my own. And in a strange and painful way, my family's betrayal is what finally gave it to me. Have you ever had to be the keeper of a difficult family secret? How did you navigate the responsibility of holding on to a truth that could change everything? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories about the complicated bonds of family. Remember to share this video with anyone who might understand that sometimes the most loving act is not to expose a painful past, but to build a better future. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to cultivate your own garden of grace.